Okay, welcome everyone to Daf Yomi 1 week at a time, Masechet Yevamot. I'm sure our favorite Masechet so far. And today is our fifth lesson, and we are going to be reviewing Daf 30 through Daf 36. And we are going to meet some very interesting cases and some very interesting principles. So I'm going to share my screen with you where you will be able to see some exciting relationships and some that you might recognize and others that you might not. I'm going to open up my chat. If anybody has questions, feel free to ask in the chat box. And okay. Let's go. Wait, hold on. Let me just move you guys also. Okay. Here we go. The Mishnah on. Okay, here we go. Sorry. Right. The Mishnah on Daf 30 at the top of the Daf tells us that we have three brothers. Now get used to this case because we're going to see it a few times in different permutations. So we have three brothers, two of which marry two sisters, and the third marries a woman who is not related to anybody. And then, wait, down. Okay. Okay, so now, oh wait, I lost you guys. Okay, doesn't matter. Okay, three brothers, two are married to two sisters. And then Reuven dies, right? Reuven dies, and Levi does Yibum. Again, Levi was the one married to not the sister, right? So he can do Yibum. Now Levi dies. So Reuven's wife is exempt to Shimon because Shimon is married to her sister, and Shula is exempt because we already mentioned that the co-wife of someone, right, of the sister is also going to be exempt, right? We said it's Sarat Erva. She is the co-wife of someone who is prohibited. However, says the Gemara, that again, the same case, if after Reuven dies, instead of Levi doing Yibum, rather he does Ma'amar. If you remember, Ma'amar means that he betroths Yael without doing Yibum yet. It's like the first stage, and then he dies. So now, again, Yael is still going to be exempt. She is still, right, Shimon's wife's sister, so she is going to be exempt. But now the co-wife needs chalitza because she really isn't a co-wife. She was almost a co-wife or half a co-wife. So she needs chalitza. The next Mishnah, again, the same case, so we're going to say it a few times. Again, three brothers, two sisters, one other woman. Now we have the other case, which is Levi dies. So now Reuven does Yibum with Levi's wife, and now he dies. Okay, so now what happens? Now Shimon wants to do Yibum. So now, again, we see that Yael is exempt because she is the sister of Shimon's wife. And Shula, again, is exempt because she is the co-wife of, right, of the Erva, right, of the woman who is forbidden. Let's do it again, but this time Reuven does Ma'amar, again, betrothal, not Yibum. Then he dies. The same idea, exempt. Yael is exempt, and Shula, we need chalitza. So now the Gemara asks, well, what's the difference between case one and case two, right? Meaning, what does it matter who married who first, right? So the Gemara tells us that this second case is the chidush, right? Chidush means the unique case, because here you might think that that Shula should get Yibum, but she doesn't. She only is allowed chalitza, but she is not allowed Yibum. Let's do a third case. Again, we're setting up the same way. Three brothers, two married, two sisters. Now, okay, Reuven dies. Now again, Levi does Yibum. Now, instead of one of the brothers dying, Chana dies. Okay, Chana dies. Then Levi dies. So now what happens when Levi dies, and now we have a Yibum situation? Shimon is now he's not married to Hannah anymore. So now, but however, since Yael, right, again, Reuven's wife is exempt because once she was prohibited to Shimon originally, she stays prohibited, even though her sister died. And therefore her co-wife is prohibited as well. So the Gemara explains that if a woman can't do Yibum at the moment of her husband's death, she could never do Yibum, right? So again, when Reuven died, Yael was not allowed to do Yibum with Shimon. So therefore, even later on, after her sister dies, she's still not allowed to do Yibum with Shimon. Let's go to case number 4. The next Mishnah tells us, again, the same case, 3 brothers, 2 sisters. Now we have Reuven divorcing Leah, okay? And then Levi dies. And then Reuven does Yibum with Shula, okay? And then he dies. So now we said that now Shula is permitted because Reuven she's not a co-wife, right? Shula is not a co-wife with Yael because they got divorced before Reuven married Shula. Therefore, Shimon is allowed to do Yibum with Shula. And this is the case that we'd mentioned in the beginning of our Masechet, that if someone is married to a forbidden relationship, again, Yael was forbidden to Shimon, but if they die or get divorced, then the co-wife is permitted. So that's exactly what we just said. So that's the case that we just said. However, it depends on the order. So if, let's say, Levi dies, and now they get divorced, right? So again, let's go backwards for a minute. The 3 of them are all married. When Levi dies, Reuven is married to Yael. So then he gets divorced. So that doesn't matter. Then he married Shula. When he dies, she's prohibited because at the time of death, Reuven was still married to Yael. So therefore, we always are going to look at the time of death of the original brother, and that is what we're going to look at when we're determining if someone is permitted for Yibum or prohibited. The Gemara tells us on Daf 30 that the author of the first of the Mishnah on Daf 13 disagrees with our Mishnah, that there are different, it's a similar scenario, but the outcome is different, and therefore it must be that it is different, it's written by different authors. And therefore, right, on Daf 13, it said that the status of the widow and the co-wife is determined at the time of the husband's death. And our Mishnah says that the status is based on when they got married, right? And if we look at when they got married, if she was forbidden, so then right, if he's married to a forbidden woman, so then the co-wife will also be forbidden. But if not, then not, right? And it doesn't change at the time of death of the brother when he dies. Or the Gemara says maybe we really do have the same author, and it reinterprets how we understand the Mishnah on 13 with our Mishnah on Daf 30. The next Mishnah tells us that all of the women, again, back to our original Mishnah at the beginning of the Masechet, remember we had 15 women, right? 15 relationships that were forbidden. If they received a faulty kiddushin, okay? So again, kiddushin means a betrothal. And if that betrothal was faulty in a way, right? The word in the Gemara is safek, which means it's not 100%. There's some sort of problem. The Gemara is going to explain what that problem is. So if they get a faulty betrothal or a faulty divorce, so then the co-wife needs chalitza, right? Again, we said if they are married properly, the co-wife is exempt from yibum. However, if that divorce or betrothal is faulty in some way, so we're not sure if they're really married or we're not sure if they're really divorced, meaning the prohibited woman and the husband, therefore the co-wife will need chalitza to be, again, to be released from the yibum experience. You're not allowed to do yibum because we're not sure if they need yibum or not. So then the Mishnah already explains what's a faulty kiddushin. What's a faulty get? If he a divorce, if he throws it to her, and we're not sure, right? He throws her the bill of divorce, and we're not sure if it landed closer to her or closer to him, right? If it lands closer to her, she's divorced. If it lands closer to him, then they're not divorced. Again, by the way, that's why nowadays we're very careful that when someone gets divorced, they need to hand the get, the contract, the document directly into their hand. There's no throwing and things like that. The Gemara always discusses this case of throwing because it makes things a little bit more complicated, right? Or or maybe there are no witnesses to the bill of divorce, to the get, or maybe the date is faulty. Sorry, I take it back. I made a mistake. When we were talking about throwing, we weren't talking about the get. We were talking about a document of betrothal. We haven't learned this yet, but in general, betrothal could be done either by giving money, right? Or the way we do it nowadays is by giving a ring. Or you can write a document that I want to betroth you. So here, sorry, as I made a mistake, the Mishnah is talking about a faulty kiddushin is if you wrote a document to betroth a woman and you threw it at her and you're not sure if it got closer to him or closer to her. The faulty divorce is where the document, the get, doesn't have witnesses on it, which it needs, or it doesn't have the date on it, which it also needs. So the Gemara tells us that with faulty betrothal, we are stringent, but it can lead to problems if you're stringent because we're not sure if the betrothal is valid, and that would be problematic. And the Gemara says, no, everyone will know that this is a stringency because, again, we're saying that you need to do chalitza with the co-wife. So everyone will understand the issue. Daf 31 tells us, okay, there's a new case, and this is another case of, we'll see in a minute. So here's the case. A man is married, right? Reuven is married to his niece. And again, his niece, that means Shimon is forbidden to Yael, obviously, because that's his daughter. And Reuven is also married to another woman. And then a house falls on Reuven and Yael, like the graphic. Again, sorry. Thank you very much to Hadran for these beautiful, great slides. So a house falls on Reuven and Yael, and we're going to try to say that they die instantaneously. So first the Gemara says, right, we're not sure, right, basically we're not sure who died first. If he dies first, right, if Reuven dies first, if he dies first, then okay, so they both die. So then Shula does not need yibum, but wait 1 second. We're going to say that Shula is going to need chalitza because we're not sure who died first. Again, if he dies first, then the tzara, the co-wife, is completely exempt. If Yael died first, then the tzara, the co-wife, needs yibum. And therefore, we're not sure who dies first. And therefore, Shimon is going to have to do chalitza with Shula. Okay, and then the Gemara says, wait a minute, why? right, maybe we should say that it's a safek. Again, it's faulty. We don't know we're not sure who died first. And then let's just let her be exempt in any case, right? Don't make her do chalitza. And then it seems that this is just a stringency. And then the Gemara says, well, really, there's a difference between divorce, right? Again, our case was divorce, and here this is death. And the Gemara says there's a difference, right? With death, I don't know who died first. I'm never going to know who died first. But with divorce, maybe I could figure out who, if they're divorced or not, right? Again, then the Gemara says, no, right? Maybe I can construct a case where really it is unsure. It's a safek, right? As I mentioned, maybe if the document of divorce lands closer to her, then she's divorced. If it's closer to him, then she's not divorced. And the Gemara says, well, what's the case, right? If there are two groups of witnesses and each one says something else, that doesn't work, because then it's really what's called a safek deoraita. We're unsure, but we're really unsure because two people are testifying that it was closer to him, and two people say that it's closer to her. So that's not our case. Rather, our case is when it's one group of witnesses, and then it becomes a rabbinic safek, right? We're not sure on a rabbinic level, and therefore, right, it's one witness against the other. And then when it's one witness against the other, it's better for her to do chalitza and not let her go out free, because we're really not sure what the issue is. The Gemara says that both the scenarios, again, we talked about if we're unsure about the betrothal or unsure about divorce. So the Gemara says that maybe both of these cases are unsure, or maybe for divorce, there's an extra case that doesn't apply to the betrothal, right? Again, for a divorce, we have a problem with time or date. That's not an issue for betrothal. That's not an important part of the betrothal contract. So that is not an issue, and therefore that would only be an issue with divorce, but not for the betrothal. The next Mishnah tells us that we have three brothers, again, married to, and now they're married to three different women. Hold on one second. Okay, if there's any problem with the internet, please write it in the chat so I'll stop and reboot the internet. So just putting that out there. Okay, again, what's our case? Three brothers married to three separate women. Now, Reuven dies, and then Shimon does ma'amar, again, our betrothal, right, in getting ready to do Yibum, and then Shimon dies. So now, Levi does chalitza to both women. Why? So the Mishnah explains, right, because you only do Yibum when it's one house, right? Again, if it was only Shimon's wife, so then Levi can do Yibum. But right now, there are two women. Yael was married to Reuven. So we have Levi who needs to do Yibum for Reuven and for Shimon. And therefore, we can't do Yibum to both women. That's two separate houses. And therefore, the Mishnah tells us that Levi needs to do chalitza. However, Rabbi Shimon says, again, our case, Rabbi Shimon says, no, he can do Yibum to one and chalitza to the other, right? Rabbi Shimon says, why are you not letting him do Yibum? Let him do Yibum to one of them. Only did ma'amar, right? He didn't do Yibum. And if he marries both, right, because in theory, he really could marry, right? Levi really could marry both of them. But you might think, right, if we let Levi marry both women, you might think that you can do Yibum from two houses, which you can't. And the first opinion in the Mishnah says you can't do Yibum to one of them and Chalita to the other, because you might think that this would be the case if they were both married to one man, right? Again, if people know that Shimon did Ma'amar to Yael, so now people already think, maybe they think Shimon was married to Yael and Shula. If you let Levi do Yibum to both of them, you might think, wait a minute, you can do Yibum to two wives of one person. So we say that is not the case, right? He could do Yibum to either one, and that is not the case. Next, let's go to Daf 32. The Daf 32, we again, our case of we have three brothers, two are married to two women. Reuven dies. Then Shimon does Ma'amar to Yael, like we had before. Now here's a twist. Shimon decides, right, he's a little confused. So he did Ma'amar, that's that heart, and then he gives a get to Yael, meaning he divorces her. Okay, by the way, that's not enough to get out of Yibum, right? You would have to either do Yibum or Chalita. A get is not enough. So now Shimon dies. What happens with Levi? Right, Levi can do Yibum with Shula because she was hanging around and nothing happened to her, but he cannot do Yibum with Yael, right? Because we're afraid that maybe you'll confuse her with someone that he regularly, right, with a wife that he gave a get to, and you might think that you can do Yibum with a woman who's divorced, which you can't. Or another option is that no, you can actually do, right? Levi actually can do Yibum with even, right, either Shula or Yael, because, right, again, because she did not have Yibum or Chalita, so then she would be permitted to Levi. Okay, our next case, two brothers married to two sisters. Reuven dies, and then then Shimon's, oh wait, 1 second. Okay, case number one is Reuven dies, right? Shimon is not allowed to do Yibum to Rachel. Again, it's his wife's sister. Now, what if Shimon's wife dies? So there are a few options here. Right, he can't do Yibum with Reuven's wife because she's already prohibited to him because of, right, when Reuven died, she was his wife's sister. So, right, again, this is the case, that when they got married, it was his sister, his wife's sister, and his brother's wife. Okay, the Gemara now says, hold on 1 minute. Okay. So that's the response to that is the response to Shimon. Okay. Now the Gemara continues on 32 and tells us that if Shimon sleeps with Reuven's wife, right? So let's go to, hold on, right? We saw that, and then if they got married, this is the order. So we'll show that in a minute. But let's say he sleeps with, if Shimon sleeps with Reuven's wife, it's a machloket. Let's take a step back. We said that he's not allowed to marry Reuven's wife. So the Gemara tells us that if he does, right, which he's not allowed to do, the question is he liable for two prohibitions, right, or only one, right? We have two prohibitions here. One is his brother's wife, and the other is his wife's sister, right? So you can see here how those are two prohibitions. And the Gemara says it depends who got married first, right? When, right? So we have Reuven and Shimon. And the question is, which one got married first? Is it that, right, when Shimon got married to Leah, was Reuven already married to her sister or not? And here we're going to now enter the world of we'll call it fundamental halachic principles, right? Fundamental Jewish principles of Jewish law. One is the idea that in Hebrew we say, ein isur chal al isur. What does that mean? If something is prohibited, and then we can construct a case where it would be more prohibited for another reason, we say there's no such thing as more prohibited. Once it's prohibited, it stays that prohibition, and you don't add other prohibitions on top of it. Or maybe we say, yes, you can add other prohibitions, or right when the scenario changes, maybe that other prohibition comes into effect. So here, let's just speak out what we mean. So here, first of all, why do we care? So the Gemara explains that if someone is liable for two prohibitions, and let's say one is more stringent than the other, what punishment do you get? Right? So the Gemara says you get the more stringent punishment. Or the Gemara suggests maybe you get the first punishment, whichever prohibition was first, that's the punishment that you get, and not the one that's above it, right? So let's say the Gemara gives an example, right? Let's say a man marries a woman, and his mother-in-law at that time is unmarried. So his mother-in-law is prohibited to him because his mother-in-law is prohibited to him. But then let's say she gets married to somebody. Now she's also prohibited to him because she's a married woman. So does he get both of those punishments or just one? And that's where the discussion comes into place. So the Gemara tells us that Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold that you can add prohibitions, right? Once you're prohibited by one thing, you don't add another thing to it. But he does hold, or he does agree with the concept, again in Hebrew it's called isur mosif. What does that mean? That, again, we talked about adding prohibitions. That many people say you can't just add prohibitions. But what if we're talking about expanding the prohibition? Now, we're going to see that there are two different ways to expand a prohibition. So the first one is called isur mosif. Mosif, again, isur means something that's prohibited. Mosif means to add. We're adding. But what are we adding? So we're going to add, right, more people. What does that mean? When Shimon married one sister, so then let's say the other sister who's single, right? So she is prohibited to him because she is his wife's sister, right? So let's say Shimon marries Leah. If you look at the picture here, let's say Shimon marries Leah. At that point, Rachel is not married to Reuven. So Shimon is not allowed to marry Rachel because she is his wife's sister. Then, right, when she marries his brother, so then she becomes, right, she becomes the wife of a brother, and now she's prohibited to all the brothers, right? So now we see that, right, that is isur mosif. More people are prohibited to her, right? Or she is prohibited to more people, right? So her status is changing, but in relation to other people. Okay, now that's one principle. The next principle is what's called isur kolel. Okay, again, here isur kolel means that, right, again, let's take Shimon, right? The same person, Shimon, becomes asur to more people. What does that mean? Let's give a case, right? So then let's say Shimon, who one second. Let's say Reuven is married to Rachel. So Shimon is not allowed to Rachel because it's his brother's wife. Now Shimon marries Leah, and therefore, when Shimon marries Leah, he is now prohibited to marry more sisters, right? Because he now just married one of the sisters, and now he's prohibited from marrying more sisters. Okay, we're going to see other cases of Isur Kolel, and we'll see how these cases will explain these two principles. So here's the case. We have a non-Kohen, right? A non-priest, meaning a regular Jew, who does avodah, he does work in the temple on Shabbat. Okay, so now a non-Kohen is not allowed to do work in the temple, number one, and he's not allowed to do it on Shabbat. Okay, so here the Gemara asks, is this one prohibition or two prohibitions, right? Meaning, what do we say? We say everyone is forbidden from doing work on Shabbat, right? And now, right, Kohanim, right, priests are allowed to do work in the temple on Shabbat. And then therefore, maybe there's only one prohibition, the non-Kohen doing work in the temple on Shabbat. Or do we say, no, right? The work that was allowed to be done in the temple is only work allowed to be done by the priest. But if you're not a Kohen, then you're not allowed to do any work, and you're not allowed to do it on Shabbat. So again, is this one prohibition or two prohibitions? Now, again, here we're talking about, we're going to say that this is Isur Kolel, right? The same person is, I don't want to use the word more forbidden, but is more forbidden, right? Meaning that person who's not a priest is not allowed to do work in the temple, and he's not allowed to do work on Shabbat. So that person has two prohibitions that he did, or do we say it's only one? Next case, you have a priest who has a blemish. A priest who has a blemish is not allowed to do work in the sacrifices in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple. So let's say he does. But not only does he do the work in the temple, but he does it while he's impure, which you're also not allowed to do. So again, is this two or one? Right? Again, if you're impure, if you're tameh, right? All priests are not allowed to do work in the temple when they are impure, right? But interestingly enough, and we did learn this in Masechet Psachim, if you remember, it is permitted for an unblemished priest to do work in the temple if he is impure. We discussed what the case is, right? If majority of the Jewish people at the time are impure, then the unblemished priest is allowed to do work in the temple. So the question is that okay for all priests, even if they have a blemish, or no, that being okay is only for an unblemished priest, and therefore again, right, once it's permitted, is it permitted across the board, and therefore we only have one prohibition, or we say no, it was only permitted to an unblemished priest, but to a priest who has a blemish, it is not okay. Okay, third case, we have a non-Kohen, again, a non-priest, who ate a bird that was killed in the way that they do it in the temple, what's called milika. We learned about that in, I don't know where we learned it. We definitely learned it before, but basically animals in general need to be slaughtered in a certain way, right through the neck. However, in the temple, birds were slaughtered in a different way called milika, where the priest would take their thumb, I don't want to be graphic, but with a nail, and go from the back of the head and basically slaughter the animal that way. That bird is allowed to be eaten by a priest in the temple. But what if now it's a non-priest who ate this? Now, in general, the non-priest is not allowed to eat it. And again, right, is this considered two prohibitions or only one? So those are our cases of what's called Isur Kolel. It becoming, right, that object becomes more right, more forbidden. And here the discussion is, do we say that really is a principle that we follow or not? And now the Gemara on Daf 33 goes through each one of these cases and says, I can understand how how you can construct a case of Isur Kolel, where it was added. However, case number 3 seems to be something that's coming at the exact same time. And that's called Isur Bivat Echad, right? It's happening at exactly, right, simultaneously. All the other cases that we mentioned, especially our case with Reuven and Shimon marrying 2 sisters, those are not simultaneous. But what happens when it is simultaneous, right? What if Shimon and Reuven marry their wives at the exact same time? So then the Gemara says, oh, maybe that's the case. We're talking about getting married at exactly the same time. And that is the case that we're talking about. And how do you construct a case? And it goes through each one of the previous 3 cases, how you can construct a case where each prohibition happens at the exact same time, right? The non-priest becomes an adult at the exact same time, or becomes blemished and impure at the exact same time. And here, the Gemara discusses that this is actually, there's a difference of opinion of what Rebbe said, right? There are 2 opinions. They're both according to the same person, right, Rebbe, and there's a machloket, what he actually said. And it's really an issue of transmission of the statement of Rebbe, right? And it seems that he only taught the first 2 cases, but not the 3rd case that we just mentioned. Rabbi Shimon says that the first 2 cases are only 1 prohibition. Rabbi Yossi says it's 2 prohibitions, right? Again, kolel or not. The 3rd case is not mentioned, and therefore it seems to be, again, as we mentioned, simultaneous, and then it's a different case. The question now becomes, right, we said we have a case of a non-Kohen doing work in the temple. So now the Gemara asks, what work does he do, right, on Shabbat? If it's that he's slaughtering the animal, we know, again, we learned in Masechet Psachim, a non-Kohen is allowed to do the slaughtering, so that's okay. And if it's the collecting of the blood or bringing it to the altar, that's not a problem on Shabbat. So what's the issue? Right? Maybe it's burning the incense. No, that's not really the issue. So the Gemara constructs a case. What's the case? It is the slaughtering, but it's not a regular Shabbat. Rather, he slaughters the bull of the high priest. Again, he is not the high priest because he's not a priest. He slaughters the high priest's bull on Yom Kippur. And that's the case, which again is prohibited. Or maybe we could construct the case we said before, and in the end, it's only rabbinic and not biblical on that level. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 33 tell us, here's the case. 2 men betroth 2 women. Again, kiddushin, betrothal, not marriage. And then they mix up or they swap the women. We'll talk about maybe how that could happen under the chuppah. So again, let's look at the case here, right? We say Reuven he's not married to Rachel, but he betrothed her, and Shimon to Leah. But then when they get to the chuppah, they switch. And Reuven ends up sleeping with Leah, and Shimon ends up being with Rachel. So now, right, if they live together, they have transgressed in the sense of sleeping with Eshet Ish, right? They're basically sleeping with a woman that's not their wife, who's married to somebody else. And if they were brothers, they would also be prohibited because they're sleeping with their brother's wife. And if those 2 women were sisters, right? Again, you see how we're adding prohibitions. If they were sisters, you're now sleeping with your wife's sister. And maybe they were in nida, right? They were impure. So now that's another prohibition. What do? The Mishnah says you separate them for 3 months to make sure that nobody is pregnant. Again, the Gemara is we're going to discuss this a lot for the rest of the shiur, but you separate them for 3 months, make sure they're not pregnant. If they were minors, then again, if the women were minors, we can assume that they're not pregnant. You can switch them right away. And if they were the women were priests, right, or daughters of priests, they are disqualified from eating truma. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, how did they get switched? Was it intentional? Wait, if it's intentional, that's even worse, right? And the Gemara tells us that you can even construct the case that you have violated 16 prohibitions. So it has to be really. So the Gemara says, no, it's bishogig. It was inadvertent, not intentional. And how do we know that? Because the Mishnah tells us that they can go back to their husbands. If it was intentional, they wouldn't be able to go back to their husbands, because that would be called having an affair. That you're not allowed to go back to your husband. Daf 34 says that if you construct this case of 16 different prohibitions, it must be that you agree with the concepts of, right, again, what we just mentioned, isur bevat achad, prohibitions that happen at the same exact time, and mosif, right, again, you're adding more people that are forbidden, and isur kolel, right, meaning, again, when Shimon betroths the sister, he's now prohibited, right? He himself is now prohibited to more sisters in the family. So the Gemara says, oh, this must be according to Rabbi Meir, who holds by all three of these principles. From here, the Gemara talks about another principle, which is, what if you made a mistake trying to do a mitzvah, right? And you ended up doing it wrong in a prohibited way. Are you punished or not, right? Have you transgressed or not? The case that's given is you do circumcision to the wrong baby, right? A baby was supposed to have a circumcision, and you switch the two babies, and you end up doing the wrong circumcision on Shabbat. Did you violate the Shabbat or not? And the Gemara says that because you were so, anxious about doing it right, so then you are not held liable for this case. But maybe in our case, you are liable because you weren't so stressed, you just messed up. Excuse me. Okay, the Gemara now comes up again with a way to construct the case that, again, it happens all at the exact same time, that the brothers become adults at the same time, and the sisters become adults at the same time, and they betroth them at the same time. It's actually a very cool case, right? It's basically two twin boys marrying two twin girls, right? Who the twin girls were born a year after. So therefore, at the exact same time, right, the boys become bar mitzvah and the girls become bat mitzvah, and everyone becomes an adult at the exact same time. And I thought that was just an interesting case. Okay, the Gemara now goes into a whole discussion if women can become pregnant in their the first time having relations. And then it goes into a discussion about Tamar, who was really the first case of Yibum that we see, right? She marries one brother and then another brother, and then in the end she marries Yehuda. The Gemara discusses what was the sin, right? Why did the two brothers, Er and Onan, die? What was their sin? You can look it up on Daf 34. The Gemara continues and talks about waiting, right? Again, the Gemara tells us you always need to wait 3 months before you get remarried. Let's say if there's a divorce, if there's Yibum, which we'll see in a minute. Why? Because again, we want to make sure that the girl is not pregnant. And the Gemara says even for a minor, right? Maybe we said you don't have to wait. The Gemara says, well, maybe you should wait because as a gzeira, as a decree, lest an adult get married. Or we say, no, the minor does not need to wait because, again, we said she is not going to be pregnant. The Gemara now discusses women who know, let's say, a woman who's going to convert or who's going to be set free, or she's in captivity. She will be very careful and use some sort of contraception to make sure that she doesn't get pregnant, and therefore you don't have to wait when they're released. But that is the discussion, and the chapter ends discussing the wives of priests, how they can't go back to their husbands or eat truma if they swapped wives, because again, there is a special stringency when we're talking about priests, kohanim. With this, we end the third chapter, and now we're going to, on Daf 35, start the next chapter, the fourth chapter. So the Mishnah tells us that what if a man does chalitza? Again, he says he doesn't want to do yibum, he does chalitza, and then it turns out that the woman is pregnant. Now, remember we said, if she's pregnant, she doesn't need to do yibum or chalitza because she's pregnant from the original, right, from Reuven, from the original wife, from the original husband. Here the issue is that they did not wait the 3 months that we said they needed to. So now the Gemara says, if the baby is born and lives at least 30 days, that's considered a viable child. And then the chalitza is invalid. He didn't need to do it. And now he can actually marry her relatives. And she is not forbidden to a priest, right? She's not considered a chalutza, a woman who had chalitza, because it's just seen as being invalid. If the child doesn't survive those 30 days, so then the chalitza is valid, and then he cannot marry her relatives, and she is now forbidden to a priest. If the yavam, let's say he did yibum instead of chalitza, right? Let's say he did yibum, and now and turns out that she was pregnant from the original husband. If that child lives, now again, if the child lives, she wasn't allowed to marry the brother. So then he needs to divorce her, and he needs to bring a sacrifice because that's a problem. He married his brother's wife when he wasn't allowed to. If the child doesn't live, so then they can stay married, right? Because they did yibum, and that's okay. Now, says the Mishnah, what if we don't know if the child is from the first husband or from the second husband? Why? They didn't wait enough time, right? And we don't know if it's a 9-month baby from Reuven, from the original brother, or it's a 7th-month baby from the brother, from the Yavam. It's very interesting, just as a side note, and if anybody is a midwife or an OBGYN, it's interesting that in the time of the Gemara, babies are viable in the 7th month or in the 9th month. It's interesting that in the Gemara, they don't discuss 8 months. It seems that either they feel that it's not viable, or there are a few different interesting theories. But the Gemara tends to talk about 7 and 9, right? Again, the case is that, right, let's say in the picture here, Rachel is married to Reuven. Reuven dies. They do not wait 3 months. Shimon marries Rachel, and now she has a baby after 7 months. The question is, right, whose child is that child? So the Gemara is going to talk about this 7 or 9, right? Is it a full-term baby and the father's Reuven, or is it a 7-month baby, right? A baby born after 7 months, and the father is Shimon. We're going to see this in a few cases in a minute. So the Gemara says if we're not sure, so then you need to get divorced, and you need to get divorced because we're not sure this child, if it disqualified yibum or not. So they get divorced, but the child is kasher in the sense that the child is valid in terms of that child's yichus, relations, or the way he's seen, lineage. That's the word I was looking for. Okay, the Gemara says, let's go back to the original case. If they did chalitza to a pregnant woman and then she miscarried, so the Gemara says that there's a machloket if she needs chalitza from the other brothers, meaning there's a discussion, can you do chalitza to a pregnant woman? right? Because a pregnant woman does not need chalitza. But if it turns out that retroactively she wasn't pregnant, meaning she needed chalitza, does it work or not? And that's the machloket, right? Meaning retroactively she always needed chalitza and it works, or no, at the moment she didn't need chalitza and therefore it's not valid, right? The same thing with yibum, right? If you do yibum with the pregnant woman, is it considered valid or not? Right? Again, the co-wife can't get married if the Yevamot, right? If the woman is pregnant and did yibum, or no, right? We wait to see if the child survives or not, and then we can figure out if the co-wife is free. Okay, Daf 36, right? So the Gemara says, what if you do yibum and it turns out that she's pregnant? So the Gemara tells us that the Sarah, the co-wife, cannot get married till the baby is born. Again, we have to see if the baby is viable or not. Again, in the time, the way the Gemara works, according to Jewish law, it's 30 days. The baby has to survive at least 30 days. That's considered a viable child. So if the baby survived, right? So then the co-wife can get married, and if not, right, then the yibum didn't really work, and the co-wife needs chalitza. The Gemara says that if they, if they say, so, okay, here's the case. They say that someone's husband died abroad. They need to wait for 3 months to make sure, right, is she pregnant or not, right? If she's not pregnant, she needs yibum. If she is, then she does not need yibum, right? So the Gemara says, why don't you just do chalitza right away? Either she needs it or she doesn't need it, right? So the fact that they don't say to do chalitza right away proves that chalitza for a pregnant woman doesn't work. The Gemara says, no, that's not a proof, because maybe it's a problem for if you do chalitza and she wants to marry a priest, right? It'll mess her up, and they won't hear whether she needed it or not. Okay, what if they did chalitza when she was pregnant and then she miscarries? So the Gemara tells us that she needs to do chalitza from the other brother. She needs chalitza from the other brothers. Therefore, it seems that the chalitza of a pregnant woman isn't valid, right? Because it's saying that wait 1 second, isn't a valid chalitza, and the Gemara says that's actually the law, that's the halacha, that she would still need chalitza from the other brothers. The Gemara continues and talks about 2 other cases where the halacha is like Reish Lakish, talking about inheritance law versus a gift, right? If someone can give a gift to whoever you want in any way that you want, but if it's an inheritance, there are certain laws when pertaining to inheritance. So the Gemara talks about different circumstances where gifts are given, right, like on the deathbed, and how do we count those gifts? Is it seen as a gift or not at the time right before the father, the main person, dies? The Gemara continues towards the bottom of 36 and tells us that if they did yibum when she was pregnant, again, as we mentioned before, and then she miscarries, he needs to divorce her. He needs to divorce her with a get. So that seems to say that he doesn't need to do chalitza, which implies that the yibum does work. So the Gemara says, again, you shouldn't marry a woman who's pregnant or nursing, again, because we're not sure then who the child goes to. But if he does, then he needs to divorce her, and he can't marry her ever again because he didn't listen to the rules. Or, says the Gemara, you have to divorce her, but after, right, she gives birth or she stops nursing, then you can marry her. Right, again, here we're not talking about a Yevamot, we're talking about a regular woman. But again, as we mentioned, if it's a pregnant Yevamot, that's already on a biblical level not okay. If again, we said, right, if the baby lives for 30 days, then it's considered valid. If it's less than 30 days, it's a safek, meaning we're not sure, right? If the child dies within 30 days, and then she marries another person, right, a Yisrael, then she should get chalitza, right? Again, let's say she was pregnant. She's like, oh, I'm pregnant. I don't need yibum. So she goes and she marries somebody else. But let's say the child doesn't survive. So now she has to go and get chalitza from the brother, right? And if her husband is a Kohen, then we say she does not get chalitza. Because remember, we said a Kohen is not allowed, a priest is not allowed to marry a woman who did chalitza. Therefore, we say that because it's a safek, again, safek means not exactly sure, then if it's a woman married to a regular person, then she should do chalitza just to cover all her bases. But if not, if she's married to a priest, we say no, don't do chalitza because that's going to mess her up with her marriage. Or the Gemara says, no, meaning when we're in safek, when we're not sure, it's better to be stringent, and she does need chalitza from both, right? She does need a chalitza from the brother. And then the Gemara says, oh, no, never mind, right? They changed their mind. And they said that if the priest is the husband, you do not need chalitza. And with that, we have finished another week of Masechet Yevamot. And I hope everyone survived. I want to wish everybody first of all, Shabbat Shalom, and a Chag Kasher V'Sameach, a beautiful Pesach. I hope all of you who learned Masechet Pesachim, I hope you remember a little bit of what we learned, or you can go back and review a little bit, especially at the end of the Masechet. We had all the laws of the Seder night, so if you guys want to, you can always go back and review that. Next week, we will be learning regular time because Daf Yomi waits for no one. Or stops for no one. So we will be meeting next week. So wishing everyone really a Chag Kasher V'Sameach, and see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi.